appeals, manufacturers go to great lengths to make things look cool. So when you sit in their car, you're excited to drive it and to own it. And sometimes that's of value, but sometimes it's just purely, flashy ego stuff. And our solution is to run a business, not, to appeal to the masses. The appeal should be that it solves the problem well.
Yeah. So I have some experience. I used to build and sell components under the name Plexi-Hide, and we had this Gantt chart that had all kinds of business logic built into it, like detecting when time slots collide and things like that. And people love that, but pretty soon they wanted to sort of use the time collision logic for business logic for something completely different. And I got stuck in some kind of educational mode when I always told people that's not the way you should do it. You should have some layer of business rules where you own the data. You shouldn't just rely on a UI control and pour data into it and then hope the UI control solves the things for the user so the user's brains get the point, because that's really what we do. We sort of trust the visual cortex of the user to get to resolve. And that's super fine. But if we depend on a third-party control but we still need this possibility ourselves, it might not be the perfect fit to put a lot of logic into the control.
Well, and it's like a drug. You become dependent on it.
Yeah.
And you probably shouldn't. So is there from my perspective, I've still got to make the decision of, do I pursue and build a lot of my new stuff with, a Windows layer, not necessarily WinForms, but a Windows layer, or do I bite the bullet and make a web layer? It'd be interesting to see, I don't know if there's a set of components that you like. You say, we've found that, this company's, there's several out there, tech something, and Developer Express actually is still a pretty big name, and what I can see their tools are pretty good. And in their defense, I've been using them since 2006, and they've been pretty reliable. There's not a lot of complaints I have. Granted, they've improved them, and I haven't been able to continue on that path, but certainly having something expedient is good, because, of course, all UI is a prototype, and so you're constantly changing it.
Yeah. But as also the industry has gone from WinForms, which was very static, if you had a control, that was the way it was. You could set a few properties, like the color of it maybe, and if it should have a frame or not. But then Microsoft said that wasn't flexible enough, especially not when you're getting larger and larger screens and people want to zoom and things going to stretch, and the font is really high resolution, and if you use only the pixels in the font, so you won't be able to read it because it only ends up like a few parts of millimeters. So they had to do something, and then their answer was VPF. And VPF is like the other way around. There are really no controls, and when there are controls, there are control templates, so that you can like switch out big pieces of the control. So it's more like a structure that binds to data, and then blocks of that structure can be replaced by styles. So that was pretty good, but it's extremely hard. No one ever learned it and never got any good at it.
Almost sounds like a view model.
Yeah, sort of. I guess it's very much is the whole...
It's a layer, right?
Yeah, the SAML layer for screens is the layer where you can transform data and make it look any way you want. So and I never really gave that much thought. I just, as I was in the component producing industry, I sort of got hit by it, because now WinForms components wasn't the go-to thing anymore. It should be a VPF component. And the VPF component, when I followed the manual and did a by-the-book VPF component, none of the users could use it, because it was too complex. You have to pull this part in here, and then you can change this, and you have to decide on your own how this is going to look. And so there was a lot of, it was a big gap. And the web is sort of like that. It's more like the SAML paradigm than the WinForms paradigm. There are sure are controls on the web, but most of the controls are built into the browser, like the input box, like and those
combo box or something.
Yeah, and then you put the styling layer on top of that, like CSS. And of course that will not be enough, so you put a lot of divs and things around that, and that has made the whole development harder than to just put things out on a grid and then you're done. But
yeah, UI development seems like it's become a career in itself.
yes, so then we have got whole communities of people only doing the front end, and by doing that they only really do the looks, and they depend on others to provide them with data and endpoints where something should go when they push this button. What should happen then? And that makes the whole development paradigm extremely cumbersome and error prone, because now you have all these layers and they all need to be in sync, and as soon as they aren't, things directly stop working. So what we want to address with EndDriven Turnkey is really get back to that paradigm where you, just as easy as WinForms, there's one way of doing it that is extremely easy and straightforward, and you get all the things up and running, but still not blocking anything. You should be able to come back to the flexibility of the standard web. So we can, and that's really what I think that what we have done with the TagExpander is really close to this kind of end in mind goal that we have, that it should be, on one end, extremely easy to get something up and running that you have put into a grid, and on the other hand, be fully flexible to do whatever you want when you want it. What do you say, Bengt, about TagExpander?
Yeah, it solves lots of problems, or when you want to more brand your GUI. But the environment for developing is not that. There are components with the GUI override, yes, but it's a divided environment with the components and your page overrides. So it's a little bit of struggle. It's close, but not all the way.
So if you compare this to a standard WinForms or Turnkey with just grid, that's a hurdle. But if you would compare that to a traditional Visual Studio doing C# backend and JavaScript frontend, that's a much more divided environment than what you have with TagExpander, I would say. So that's the other thing that we always need to remember, to have the perspective that we're actually trying to solve something that no one really has managed to solve.
Yeah, so it's more, in my view, go decoupling the front end and back end and go for React or something else in the front end. That's more it's done for front end development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we will see what
so compared to that with a component structure and
I always had the attitude that if I waited long enough, we would have something like WinForms in a web style environment. Of course, that was an excuse, but I'm shocked at how poorly executed that has been in our industry. You know, that there isn't a good toolbox to slap together some screens like you would in WinForms and be done.
Yeah. And I think partly is because the problem is so many facets on this problem that we're talking to the same crowd that wants to do Facebook and have a really low overhead simple client that's going to be used by billions at the same time, and the high-end business application with lots of business rules and all depend on fresh data. So these two problems are extremely different. And the Facebook problem, if we were to do that with turnkey technology, we would require quite a lot of server capacity to be able to hold a memory state for each active user. But if we're going to do that for a more business-like setting where there's a controlled set of users, that's not a problem. It's something you want. You want to have control over everything. Like in Facebook, it splits in. They use this CQRS pattern, command and request, with databases that builds up queues and syncs lots of databases. And it's eventually consistent. That means that you can't really trust what you see. Is this the latest? It will be latest one of these days, but you never know when. You can't really say. And if you have a friend in Latin America, you don't know when those updates are going to propagate to Europe or North America. It might happen now. It might happen tomorrow. There's just no way to see, and that's fine when it's like soft information. But that's totally a big no-no when it comes to banks. So as no one has really pulled apart the stack to describe the different scenarios that we use computers for, everyone are just forced into the same rabbit hole and say we're going to use computers and then we need tools and the tools got to work for everything. But that's not true. You need to know what you're going to use, what you're aiming to do.
Well, and another reality that I think has happened has hidden itself from me, but the paradigm of how a user interacts with a piece of software is a lot different. I hire younger people and their expectations of how interface and they would process a given task is significantly different than we date back to using command line stuff, and so a UI that's a graphical user interface, the good old look and feel mouse and keyboard, was a great paradigm shift, but it's kind of over. And now we're in a world where I think most things that are presented to a user are very much a task-based interface designed to do what that user needs at that point, where they order something from eBay or they message someone in a messaging app. And that's what they expect now. And the idea of having access to kind of a more general purpose piece of software that, you would change the profile of something to impact your database. That, I think even just the idea of a database is arcane. And it's tough to, because of course we need them. database, that's one of the arguments I've had, is data normalization is still real. It still matters. But nobody cares. And that causes some big problems. And I think there is a lot of software out there on the web that breaks some rules that people just don't notice it because they're not going down those alternate paths. The 80% is handled well and good enough, ship it. So it would be interesting to see if someone's actually written a study of how UI has changed from the world of command line stuff to today. Because I think there's 3 or 4 paradigms that have impacted the world that is good to be aware of. And absolutely the tiered type structure with a transaction is normal now, right? You do some stuff, you hit go, things change, right? That didn't used to be the case. It used to be, well, I change stuff and it's immediately impacting things because I'm interacting with a database. That's a different world.
Yeah. And I think what one wording in this is back office versus customer, because many of the applications are geared to a set of users, which are the consumers, and they should have this task-based interface. Are you happy? Are you sad? A few buttons they can push, a few things that come up, and they choose between them, and they are done. And that's one set of doing UI. But then we have the back-end things, the back-end side of the things, that to manage this system, to know, to answer questions, how many users did we have today, where did they go, have they paid, have they had issues, who's doing what, finding answers and working with the data. That's a whole different ballpark and geared to the ones that are hired by this fancy company that produces the fancy screens for the consumers. So I think we need to separate that as well. And what we usually see is that when using MDriven Turnkey, you quickly get all the back-end stuff going so that you know that you have the data, you have the possibilities that you need, and then you produce the screens for the consumers, and they are never up to standard. They are we don't like that, we don't want a menu bar, we don't want the left side menus, we don't want these buttons, we don't like these colors. It's everything that's wrong with that. So and it's typically like 10% of the sets of view models needed for the whole system are like these, aimed for the consumer. So 10% you should do something extra with, but you don't have to do the extra day 1. You can do the extra day 100. It's fine. But then, of course, the more experienced you are, you sort of postpone when you start to do the extra, because you know as soon as you have done the extra, there's a
fundamental will change.
Yeah, and there's a pain to do the quick changes, because you have invested in a solution from 2 directions, from the UI perspective and from the information perspective, and they must meet. And as soon as you have invested from 2 directions, you have it will be tougher to keep things up to date. Henrik Törnvall, have you any insights into this? You have done a few UIs for end users, consumers.
Yeah, exactly. We're in my organization, people aren't that interested in UI design, I guess. It's mostly just if it works and people get their tasks done, then it's fine. If there are some extra hurdles or it's not that easy to use. But that's government.
Yeah, so your consumers are still employees from someone else that are obligated to do these things, and then it can be more form-like. You must do these things, But if you would have consumers that you were competing to get these consumers, or they will go to someone else, then
I guess then we will focus much more on like perfecting every single step of the way. So
Do you end up building classes? The way I do it is I build a transient class designed for a specific task, or maybe a set of transient classes so that a user's specific task is well defined in that, and it becomes transactional. Some data is entered, things are checked, and then it's processed when it's correct. But that transient class can give feedback visually, like it can change the color. This is in red because you've got it wrong, or things like that. I find that building classes for specific tasks, although it's time consuming, is really pretty ideal. I see no downside other than you've got software development to do.
Yeah, I haven't used it that much in that way, I guess. So far, maybe.
So sometimes I know that we do transients when doing a complex report, for example, and that's going out to Excel or something like that, and you will either end up with really strange data and have a hell of a time in Excel trying to do conditional styling and things like that. Then it's easier to just massage things so that you get square cells already in your data, even if it wasn't.
Yeah.
Mixing types.
Also, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If you use turnkey UI, and you have a transient for keeping the state in the rules in the new model, then if the user idles for 10 minutes, then it's gone.
Yeah, if there's no reason to keep the screen in memory, it will be purged. That's correct.
Yeah.
So that might be a problem to keep too much transient state. That's when you're working with a fat client, it's always up to the user's computer, I guess, to stay online. But if I thought we should look a bit on the new operators, but if you want, rather we can just show how TagExpander works, so that just to get a quick view on what's what. We can do both. Let's see. See my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Right. So, give me an example then. What should we have for data here? I'm gonna put you over here so that I see you. Well, let's do something, just a nonsense example. And I'm gonna do with the auto forms. And to get this going, I can I can run this in the local prototyper. I'm gonna grab the latest so that we can show the operators as well. And so if I have a class seeker of class 1s and a new class 1 with some data, and add a few class 2s to this. And if I want to override this screen, and that's called autoform class 1. I don't like this. I like the data, but I don't like the look of it. Well, then you need to do a page override. So we go to where we have this model, show the current model directory, and as it was in the downloads, I think I'll resave it somewhere else because it will be hard to follow with all those files. I'm gonna save as C.
Are you in Visual Studio or no?
No, this is just the MDriven Designer straight up, but it would be the exact same in Visual Studio. Demo. I'm gonna save it here, and I'm gonna try it again. Local turnkey prototyper, and start that. Now I lost the data because I didn't move the data file, so I'm gonna have to create a new class 1. Yeah, so in order to get the view override going, I'm gonna go into where I have the file. Looks like this. This is where the data lives when I'm prototyping, and this is the modeler file. And to make this work, I need a x2 assets tk. The assets to actually the extra assets that's going along with the model to the web server. So we can read about this in wiki assets tk. Yeah, so it's the name of the model and then assets tk. And if we want to do tag expander, we can read about that. It goes in a file called override pages. And I guess this everything needs improvement, but I think this needs to be in a views folder. Do you remember, Bengt? Am I doing it right now?
I'll check.
So if I do and this is what the Bengt means. This is like a split environment. Now I have this definition of a UI. I'm gonna head back here and just see that I'm using it right. Once a TagExpander file is found, HTML, yeah. So let's open this with Notepad.
That's correct.
And if I just write anything here, save that, and I think I need to restart this one. So I do play again, and I start the local prototyper. And I search for class 1. And now when I go into showing class 1, I still got that one. Yeah, because I read the I should name it like this and TagExpander. I don't know what I was thinking about. New text document, that wouldn't work. I wasn't thinking. So I need to say what's the name of the view model I want to expand, and then TagExpander. Are you checking me, Bengt? Is it?
Yes.
Yes. Sort of correct. And now I restart it again by pressing this button. And so I can see that it have picked up on my override. Of course, that was just a oh, where did it go? A HTML file with nonsense. So it wrote nonsense. That's fine. And what I'm now free to do is to make a reference to an external component packages like Developer Express or something like that, and make use of that data in a fashion like this maybe. So what this means, it will well, this is the tag for doing a bullet list, and this is the single bullet, and this is the Angular expression to repeat over some kind of expression, and this is where TagExpander comes in. So what expression should we repeat over? Well, let's repeat over our view model doesn't have anything to repeat over, but we can simply add a multi-link of the class 2s and add the attribute 1 and 2 over here. So now we would have something to repeat over, and that would be called class 2s. So in that case, we should have class 2s and take the expression of that. And on each row, there will be things like attribute 1, for example. So this is the name of the thing in the view model. So that's one way to get full freedom of HTML, and full freedom in such a way that you can do standard HTML as I do here, or pull in a component from DevExpress and hook that up with data binding like this. Because all those components, once they come to the web, have these hook points where you need to fill in expressions on how to fill them with data. That's just how the way the web works. Since this view model also had the attribute 1 on the class, we can go like the TagExpander logic has this kind of pattern that you can use the control straight off as Turnkey would have done, and then you would just go percentage and then view model column name and then dot control percentage. That means you would go percentage attribute 1 control. So when this is restarted, it now shows just attribute 1 just as Turnkey would have done. But of course I don't see the bullet list because we didn't have any attributes 2s or any class 2s to our. So let's do that. Let's create a new class 2 and put some data in that. And I'm gonna set this to a class 1 and the one we have on screen like that. and then if I show this, I see the bullet list with the class 2s. So this is the way to be totally free from whatever turnkey pushes on you to build any UI that you see fit. And now you react to this menu bar, because I don't want that either, and that's the common case. So we have the no menu control, and that's just a CSS to actually hide that. So after restarting this, and going into this, I just have a plain web page. You can do whatever you want with it to meet your needs. And things that aren't obvious, and as you, Damien, alluded to, UI that needs to take up the same space depending on some other data. Well, let's try that one. Let's say we have a Boolean value here. We call that bool and make that Boolean. And then we say that this view model shows that Boolean value. And that goes over here in our designer. And this Boolean value should decide if this control attribute 1 should be visible or not. So then we'll just use the value of that in the visual expression of attribute 1. So now we have a new control called bool, and we're going to add that one to our web page so that we can set it.
I think its name is Boolean, not bool.
Yeah, that's just the name of the attribute, because I named it bool on the attribute, but the type is Boolean.
Backwards. Yeah. Okay.
So I've added that to the screen and save that, and restarting this one by changing it slightly. So what should happen when I push this one? Ideally this one should have been hidden, but it wasn't, because that's not, I guess it's not part of the entire control. But what we could do is easily do a div around this, and help me out, Dennis, what's the value for getting something to, it's like putting hidden here, right?
Display none.
Display none on the class, but I think, isn't there a hidden tag on the div? Might remember wrong. Oh, where did the other web page go? Macro expand. No, I lost my way here. TagExpander. So we could do style and my style. And say that I have a column And now we can actually get into what I said we should talk about. Because if I want to, before I had to go like this, if self bool, if that is true, then I want to return display none. Else I want to return nothing.
Now I think what you were thinking about is ng's show, maybe.
But will this work, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in .class, it's style in your web page.
Well, when I send in style, I can send in the
Style. Yeah.
the style directly.
Yes.
So that will return the data of this. That's my plan. And I refresh this. And yeah, oh. What? Yeah, okay, there's no way to, I put the div and then I did this wrong. That was not an ending div, it was the div went over everything and then it hit the control as well, so my bad. If I change this and we save it, they're gonna go back. So when I push this one, the control was hidden. Yeah, good. And of course this is not a big selling session on producing great UI. It's a big selling session on producing any UI you want. So this is a very simple way to do any HTML you need, but getting all the data from structured definitions from view mods. And as you can do this and hide and show different things, you can take up the same view real estate for different purposes at different times. And I'm thinking about you, Damien, when you said that you had a super search that when the result came back, depending on the type of the result, the thing should show in a grid. And you can either do it like this, that you have some way to polymorphically address all the results in one list, or you can do it something like this, that depending on what the type you got back, you hide everything else and show this instead in the same place. So that's two different ways to get the effect that the user wants to see, just the things that you got hit.
Yeah, I prefer to return a more generic set, a list that the actual base data type can be different, but because like on our directory screen, when you search for a name, it can return a vendor or a client or a non-client. Well, I just want a list, and then if you interact with one of those rows, usually that's on a subscreen, then you would open a different subscreen for a vendor versus a client.
Yeah.
But in terms of searching by a phone number or an email or something, that search should be encapsulating all of those entity types at once. Otherwise, you end up with, oh, wait, you know, phone rings, type in phone number. Oh, you're not a client, you're a vendor. Hold on, go to a different screen. Search.
Yeah.
Okay, now I found you. That's ridiculous.
Yes, so I saw the video you sent. We're not going to show it here because we don't have the time, but maybe we can share it with the group to I can put it on the web page too. So
yeah, and so that again comes down to that idea of a transient class. What I'm doing is I'm building a superclass on top of these persisted classes, and this superclass contains just what I need to display in the grid. In fact, I derive some information where I can concatenate together maybe the address and the phone number and the name all in one attribute, so that it's not on a grid with 300 different columns, right? You split your columns in a smart way, not like, oh, I need a new attribute to add a column. I need another attribute to add a column. That's ridiculous. If the only reason in my world to have a column in a grid is if you want to sort by that column. If you need to sort by, say, the city, then that should be in a column of its own, and you click on it and it sorts. Otherwise, if you don't need to do that, the city should be added to probably a generic address string that you can see the whole thing in one column. But all of that works really well when you just build a transient class on top that pushes this stuff together, and that's what you display.
Yes. But another way of to avoid doing the transient class, that's not a problem. You can absolutely do that. But that's to massage things in the view model in the result of the seeker. And of course,
the view model is almost a specialized type transient class. The view model can do a lot of what I talk about.
And if it is that you want to do the transient classes, then you would simply first sort of do the search, then create the transient objects based on the result in vSeeker result set, and then you would show that in a grid. So and that's really easy to incorporate into this strategy. But what we were alluding to was the thing that the new operators, because this doesn't really look very it doesn't really fit the paradigm of a functional language, but this is the way that OCL has forced us to do switch statements, if-then-else statements. But
yeah, I use those all the time in derived attributes.
Yeah, but they are bulky and hard to get right. And since this is a functional language, this branch of execution must return the same type as this branch, because the resulting thing must be of a given type. So if this, if I had to have 0 here, it would say the parameters of this operation have no common superclass, string and int 0 and int 32. But what we did instead is to so you're gonna do a copy of this, copy and paste. I'm gonna put that over here. So instead of doing it like this, we put an operator on bool called case. True, false. Hope it's here because I'm not sure I have the right version. Huh. Okay. Surprise, surprise.
This is very iterative, not declarative.
To do if-then-else. Well, sometimes you need to filter in 2 ways. So I think it's still declarative. I'm not sure why I didn't have the operator. I must have an old version. Oh my god, it's going bad because that one didn't have the click once installed. Or am I doing anything else wrong that I can't think of right off the... It was called case. So the set has expired, so we get that, but on it. yeah, case true false. So I guess I had an old version. So what this does is it takes two arguments which are expressions in themselves. So if we have true, we will do that, and if we have false, we will do this. And that way we get it written like this, and that's much more compact and better. And the result is a string that we can do things with, like to low. And depending on if this value is true or false, we will get the correct value. So instead of ending up with something like this, we end up with something like this. And I think it's much nicer to read, to see what happens. Let's try that out in the debugger. So if we do true dot case true false, so the result is that, but if I change this value to false, and of course this is an expression, so whatever this is, as long as it ends up in a Boolean, the case true false can be executed on it. So I can write things like 1 equals 2. That's false. So we should get false back. And I can do things, expressions here as well. So I could go like class 1, all instances first attribute 1. But if it's false, I want to do class 2, all instances first attribute 1. Both of those has attribute 1, so I don't know if that is true, but 2 equals 2. I didn't have any, because when I started the debugger I got a different file than the one that, so I'm gonna take a seeker and create a new one and say that this is C1. No, I started the debugger with transient. I don't get any save and that's fine. Just explaining what happened. And on the class 2, I'm going to write class 2. Like that. So this is C1. And if this one is false. So that's really a compact way of getting the true and false things. Did I just lose everyone?
Nope.
Nope. Good. Good. So that's one of the new operators. And this one is...
I'm always cautious of that sort of thing. I like to write code that's old and boring that I know works. I would be more tempted to use the if-then-else just because it's a structure I know works. You're always thinking fault tolerant, right? I like the compactness, but I would be scared that, does it always work?
Yeah. So it's not part of the standard OCL, but a lot of things that we do deviate from the standard in such way that we make it usable. If you think of it as in standard OCL, you don't have any mutability at all. There's no action language, so you could.
Yeah.
We really do need to deviate from the standard somewhat to make it usable for our purposes, and that's what we do.
So will your OCL get syntax checked and stuff before you run?
Yes. So
that's a big problem in ECO3, that if you break something in OCL, you find out when you're running it.
Yeah. Of course, that's one of the many, I would say, benefits with MDriven having a few more years on its neck than Eco ever had. And
it's only 15.
Yeah, something like that. And
no, it's exactly 15. Trust me, I know.
Yeah. So what we do is all the time, to whenever you save this error check is executed, and we will find the errors in derived attributes or in view models and things like that, and it would be easy to find them. And we always say that you should never execute a system that has a red dot on this check, because there should be no errors when you start your system. And you should never have any errors while checking your code, etc. So that's one of the operators that we did. But we also, when we do actions, we might want to do, it's much more common in actions to disregard the result. You just want a expression to execute, but you don't care about the result. You might think, is that really true? Well, I argue that it is. Let's say that you have... so what's the operator that we have introduced that's only for actions? It's called... what was it called?
WhenTrue.
WhenTrue. Good. So there's no version that takes two parameters. So WhenTrue enables you to skip this. What should we do when it's false part? Because that you might not be interested in that every time. So this one, just execute this. And of course, when it looks like this, it might be totally silly. But if this was a method on class 1.
If I can ask a selfish question.
Yeah.
How easy is this to use to dictate color of a control? If you want, let's say, your pricing margin is below a certain threshold, so you would display it in red instead of green.
Yeah, good point. Let's test this one. Change stuff. We're gonna add a method on. Come on. I'm gonna add a method. Add a method and call it change stuff, and change stuff.
Well, I think you'd want it as a derived attribute, because as a method, you're going to have to call it periodically, a derived attribute.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go in for the motions to show the WhenTrue thing. So let's say that this one has attribute. Well, put a star behind that. I don't know why this is oh. And heading over to the debugger, I'm gonna, oh no, now I'm gonna reread the model because I've changed things. But as I do that, I'm gonna lose my transient classes because I started the debugger in, I see we're running out of time. Start system, debugger, XML, start system, debugger. So I push that once, and let's see what the result is. Attribute 1 is that value, because this one was false. If this one is true, I see that the save button lights up, and this one is with a star behind it. So whenever I hit this, it will change things, but if this were to be false, things wouldn't change. Hit, 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 and so it's still the same. So that's how that operator works. Those two operators, I think, will be used a lot, at least by me, to get things a bit more compact. But your question was, how easy is this to use to set a specific style on a control? Really good question. Glad you asked.
So another good example is, again, in our industry, vehicle VIN numbers are 17 characters long. And so when a user is entering a VIN number, I have a label that displays saying VIN number too short, VIN number too short, until they enter 17 characters.
Yeah.
And it says VIN length correct. And if they add another character, then it says VIN length too long. And that's a derived attribute because it has to display immediately. So it looks like that would be a good use of this technology. If you can get the length of your string, I don't know if you can.
Yes. Of course, since it's expressions, you have full access to stuff. So let's say we have, this is a simple way to create styles from within the model. So it's new style 1 and new style 2. And if this one should have a style reference, which is an expression, we can do things like self bool case true false and new style 1 and otherwise new style 2.
Well, and what's really cool there is you can define the Boolean parameter separately from the style change.
Yeah, so that's just part of the model, and then you have the style reference, you mark it as being an expression.
Yeah.
And that would, if everything works as expected, well, now it would, ideally that would work and set the style here, and I think it does, but I won't have time to go into why it didn't work just now, regretfully, because we have passed our time. But what we, as you alluded to, Damien, to get something to show if it fulfills a criteria, there are different ways to do that. One thing is the validations. So you would add a validation rule, and this one, attribute 1 dot length must be bigger than 10. So that's a validation rule.
Okay.
And then you would say must be longer than 10. And let's start this one up again. Okay, it already ran. And I wonder if that's due to not being. I'm gonna remove the TagExpander to see if that's the one that's tripping it up. Gonna resave this. So now I got the style working. Yeah, but I hide it when. Let's see.
That's cool though.
It's supposed to.
And I think that's a big deal with UI in general, that your UI should polymorph based on what's on the screen, because then you can reduce the amount of crap you have on a screen.
Yeah. So we're gonna
highlight or you add only what's necessary.
What we need to do with validations rules are to say which control we mean to show that rule on. So I just need to associate it like that, and then resave the model. And once I do that, yeah, and it's hidden. Yeah, now must be longer than 10.
Yeah.
And once it is,
perfect.
Yeah. So good. Sorry to having you work overtime. Great to have you, and hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
2 weeks is the 22nd, so not quite Christmas.
Oh, right. Maybe we should pick it up after Christmas. Get something sent out.
Up to you. I'm available.
Yeah, but I guess we will just do Christmas first.
Thanks again, Hans.
Thanks. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks.
That was useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.